My name is Steve Frias. I'm a resident of Cranston. This is actually the first time I'm testifying before the State House. This has been an interesting experience tonight. Basically, I submitted about 13 pages of written testimony with footnotes, and I am not going to read the testimony tonight. All right? So even if you disagree with me, you'll agree with me. Just summarize this quickly. All right? There are basically about 5 points I want to make overall. Number one, you've heard this a little bit already, which is that economists have shown these public subsidies for stadiums don't make sense, okay? They do not generate the number of jobs. They don't generate enough tax revenues to justify the subsidies. And this is not just like, you know, the conservative economists. This is almost unanimous. You do a survey of economists have shown it's like about 85% say this doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And this has been over not just one study, it's like over 2 decades worth of studies. And this is actually one of the reasons why I decided to testify, because to me this is like, I don't understand what everyone else is seeing that I'm seeing when I read all this economics literature. The analysis that you're seeing from the city of Pawtucket by the consultant is also the consultant that's done this before for other baseball teams. And if you look at how economists describe these sorts of studies, they're called promotional literature. There's flaws, there's assumptions in them, they don't turn out correct, the forecasts are off. I looked at the study they did in Providence for the new Providence Stadium, compared it to the Pawtucket Stadium. I just saw on my own, I noticed they're forecasting more income tax revenue just from the stadium in the new stadium Pawtucket than if it had been built in Providence. They're forecasting a 40% increase in attendance, when in the Providence study they indicated that the comparable market for Pawtucket would have been the Columbus, Ohio minor league team, which had only had a 20% increase after a new stadium. So to me, these forecasts are pretty rosy and optimistic. And I believe that, you know, you need an economist and some other people to go through these studies and analysis and note, and you'll see that there are lots of flaws and assumptions here, okay? And you hear the Pawsox say, hey, you know, this is, the risk to the taxpayers are minimal, okay? If it was minimal, they would guarantee it just to get this done. They won't, because they know these forecasts tend to be off. So that's the first point I want to make. Second point is 38 studios. I know you bring up 38 studios. Some people say, some people agree, some people disagree that this should be compared to it. I'll say this that I think is hard to disagree. In 38 studios, you had debt taken on for which the taxpayers were ultimately responsible for that assisted a private company to promote economic development without voter approval. The same thing is happening here. There could be different business models, different kinds of businesses, but the same type of process of taking on debt, taxpayers could be ultimately responsible, and there's no voter approval here. And this debt is for a private business for economic development. The way to fix that, of course, is to have a bond referendum. If you actually do that, you will get lower bond interest costs because you wouldn't have the equivalent of this is a revenue bond, sometimes called moral obligation bonds. You'd have a general obligation bond. Now, a reason people do not want to have bond referendums is because they get voted down. And that's why I think it's going on here. There'll be other reasons, but we have had bond referendums, sometimes our special elections. I'm really trying to get to the, I know you guys want to get out of here, so believe me, I'm trying to go as quickly as I can.
We've got all night.
Okay, I mean, just, don't worry, I know I'm in the Senate, but I'm not into filibustering, okay? I'm just telling you. The third point I want to make is there are constitutional and legal problems here with this legislation. I mean, both legislations. First of all, as I point out, I think there's a 2/3 requirement here. Okay? And the reason I say this is that you're essentially authorizing bonds to be issued that would put state tax revenue at risk for a local purpose. The local purpose here is the Pawtucket Redevelopment Agency. That is a local entity. This is not for the EDC. The EDC is a statewide entity. I think you would have an issue there. The second is a private purpose. I've looked at some case law, and basically a public entity that purchases a site, leases it to a private business, is a private purpose under a 1952 case, and it required a 2/3 vote. Okay? Now, lawyers can disagree. I know that's what happens. You could always go to get an opinion from the Supreme Court if you think, to settle it. And also, I'd point out there's constitutional issues about eminent domain here. You are changing the eminent domain legislation, laws, so that you no longer have to have a blighted substandard area. Our Constitution was amended in 1955 specifically for redevelopment because there was so much controversy. And they said it had to be a blighted and substandard area. You're taking that out. I'm not sure that's going to pass constitutional muster. If you try to simply change the legislation so that in this particular instance, you can have the Apex site taken over by the Pawtucket redevelopment in order to build a park, you're going to get into issues, other legal issues, I believe, even under the Supreme Court. If you look at it, there are issues about potential concerns about targeting particular properties to benefit particular private entities. All right? And then, of course, nobody knows how much the cost of this site's going to be. That's another problem. The fourth area is basically, can we do something else with this money? This is $73 million over 30 years. And sometimes they call it economics opportunity costs. To me, you could do tax relief. I also have kids in the public schools. You could repair our public schools. We need hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to go over there. I mean, I know there was a lot of people in the building trades here. That would also create building trade jobs. And you look at what like Massachusetts does. Massachusetts does not spend money building stadiums, and they do very well in their economy. And the Commerce Corporation, I know, was here supporting this. I look at some of their deals, and we have people disagree about, and I disagree with a lot of them, obviously. But you look at like GE Digital. They're going to give $5 million, you get 100 jobs. You give $11 million, you get 300 jobs. What are you going to get here? $73 million over 30 years to get 162 permanent jobs at the stadium. It's not even making sense to me from that sort of perspective. And the last area I'd like to touch upon is the tough subject here, which is, look, if we don't do this, the Pawsox may leave. First of all, I think they're in a weak bargaining position. And I'll explain why quickly. In 2015, they said if we don't get this Providence Stadium, they were going to possibly leave. 2017, they came up with Plan B. They came back. And they said if you don't give this to us by July 1st, we may go elsewhere. They're here again. The problem is that Massachusetts is not interested in the model they're looking for, I think, which is state taxpayers subsidizing the building of a new stadium. So that's left with going to some place like Montreal, which is not something they want to do, I think. So that's number one. And the reason that's driving this new stadium, we hear about how bad McCoy is and all this stuff. McCoy had problems before 2015, but nobody really talked about it. The ownership didn't push about it, didn't seem like to me. I read in the news. A new ownership has bought this team for a lot of money, and they need to make a lot of revenues. So the way you do it, as I've read in the economic literature, is they usually try to get a new stadium to recoup their profit, to increase their investment. That's what's going on here. Now, I personally feel also, they talk about affordable tickets, and I go to Pawsox about every year with my kids. I caught a foul ball. My son got a batting glove thrown to him. They were even dressed up as mascots went on the field. I got no problem with, but those affordable ticket prices they're talking about, they're guaranteeing that for 5 years. Usually there's no guarantee for the full 30 years. And what can happen is they could obviously increase it. And when it comes to the minor leagues stadiums, you notice, it's becoming more and more like major league stadiums. That's what I've read in economic literature on this. So, last things I'll say is, if they were to leave, you could probably find another baseball team to come in. Could be single A, could be double A, could be collegiate, I'm not sure. The revenues lost, actually, probably wouldn't see much of a difference, because what happens is, as economists have pointed out, sports teams leave, other people spend their money elsewhere, other recreation, other entertainment. Tax revenues still come in. And I hear a lot of talk about this being a catalyst. McCoy Stadium, I've read a lot of articles. I go through history. I read a lot of stuff about 1930s and 1940s about McCoy. And they thought that this was going to change everything in Pawtucket. It didn't turn out that way, okay? And when Tony Pyrus was asked in 2015 in the Valley Breeze about the impact of the Pawsox leaving, what I read in the Valley Breeze, it said it wouldn't have a major economic development impact if the Pawsox left. I read Stephen Pryor, what he said in 2011 about a stadium, an arena, and he said, look, arenas are not a panacea. They are not an incredible catalyst. I'm paraphrasing incredible catalyst, but he did use the word catalyst. This, to me, is not a stadium, a new stadium is not going to be the solution for Pawtucket's problems. So that's it. I'm sorry it took too long, but I think I did about 3 to 5 minutes, somewhere in between there. I thank you for your time. For those of you who've already decided to support this, I understand. For those of you who are unpersuaded, I hope I provided some helpful information to you. And thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness?